Welcome to the Leadership Buzz with Lloyd Buzz Buzzell, an International Coaching Federation credentialed coach, DISC practitioner, and retired Air Force officer with 37 years of leadership experience. This podcast is for leaders who want to align behavior with values and grow in self-awareness. And each episode features one book, one idea, one story, and 3 coaching questions to help you reflect on your leadership. Work hard. Tell the truth. Here's Buzz. Let's roll.
Today we're talking about something every leader says they want, honesty. But here's the challenge. Do our teams actually believe we want it? It's easy to say, my door is always open. It is much harder to create a culture where someone is willing to walk through that door and tell us something we don't want to hear. I heard a phrase recently that stuck with me. No mess, no magic. The best teams are not the ones without mistakes, disagreements, or difficult conversations. The best teams are the ones willing to step into the mess because they know that it's where learning, innovation, and trust are built. Today's book is The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson, and it challenges us to think differently about fear, failure, and what it really means to create a place where people can speak the truth. TJ, tell us more about the book today.
Today, Buzz explores The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson. Edmondson introduces the powerful idea of psychological safety, the belief that people can speak up, ask questions, challenge ideas, and admit mistakes without fear of embarrassment or punishment. But this book is not about creating comfortable workplaces where everyone always agrees. It is about creating honest workplaces where learning can happen. In a world where organizations move quickly and problems are complex, leaders cannot afford silence. The best ideas, the early warnings, and sometimes the uncomfortable truths often already exist inside our teams, but only if people feel safe enough to share them. Today, we will explore what leaders can do to replace fear with trust, encourage candor, and build teams where people are willing to say what needs to be said. Here's Buzz.
No mess, no magic. Today we're talking about something every leader says they want. Honesty. Every leader wants people who are committed. Every leader wants good ideas. Every leader wants people who care enough to solve those problems. But here's the harder question. Have we created an environment where people are willing to tell us the truth when the truth is uncomfortable? Because it is easy to say, my door is open. Most believe that. I did. But the real measure is not whether the door is open. The real measure is whether people believe it's safe enough to walk through it. That is what Amy Edmondson's challenged us to think about in The Fearless Organization. She introduces the concept of psychological safety, a shared belief that people can speak up with ideas, concerns, questions, and mistakes without fear of being embarrassed or punished. But I think this concept gets misunderstood. Psychological safety doesn't mean comfortable. It does not mean easy. It does not mean lowering expectations. Actually, the highest performing teams combine psychological safety with high standards. They have trust and accountability. They care about people and they care about the results. Those two ideas are not opposites. The strongest teams are willing to step into hard conversations because the mission matters. A phrase I heard recently struck with me, and that was no mess, no magic. Because the magic rarely happens when everything is perfect. It happens when someone says, I think we have a problem. I see this differently. I made a mistake and I need help. Those are vulnerable statements. Those are also the moments where teams learn. The question for leaders is not, do you want people to speak up? Of course you do. The question is, have you created a culture where speaking up feels worth the risk?
Buzz, you mentioned psychological safety is often misunderstood. Are you saying fearless organizations actually still have conflict and accountability?
Exactly. And I think that's the biggest misunderstanding. Fearless does not mean fear never exists. Courage only exists because fear exists. Think about that. You cannot demonstrate courage in a situation where there is no risk. The goal of leadership is not to remove every uncomfortable moment. The goal is to create enough trust that people are willing to move through those moments together. And let's face it, in the Navy, it is said that a calm sea never made a sailor. And sometimes, as leaders, we accidentally create silence, not because we're bad leaders or because we don't care, because of how we respond. Someone brings us a problem. Our first reaction is, how did it happen? Why didn't we catch this? Who made that decision? And those might be fair questions, but the order matters because before someone evaluates our words, they evaluate our reaction. Did we get curious, defensive? Do we look for learning, or do we look to blame? Because the next time they have information, they will remember what happened the last time. Culture is built in those small moments. One of those greatest examples of this comes from aviation. For years, aviation studied accidents and found something interesting. Many failures were not because people lacked technical ability. The pilots were skilled, crews were trained. The problem was communication. Someone saw something and someone questioned something. Someone had information, but the information did not move. Sometimes hierarchy got in the way. The captain was seen as the authority. The person with less rank or less experience hesitated. Aviation realized something powerful. The best idea in the room is not always attached to the highest rank. That changed aviation. It led to crew resource management, CRM. This is something that we use in the ICBM nuclear force when I was leaving. The idea that every person on the crew has responsibility. That's with communication. That's with sharing information. Everyone contributes to the mission. It did not remove the captain. It actually made the captain more effective. Leadership was no longer about having every answer, but it became creating conditions where every piece of information could surface. And few moments demonstrate this better than January 15th, 2009. U.S. Airways Flight 1549, the Miracle on the Hudson. Captain Sully Sullenberg and First Officer Jeff Skiles take off from LaGuardia in New York City. Shortly after takeoff, they hit birds and lose thrust in both engines. Imagine that moment. A normal flight becomes a crisis, and there's no time for ego, no time for pretending. That hierarchy to block communication, not time for it. Sully focused on flying the aircraft. Skiles immediately begins working through the engine restart checklist. Air traffic control provides options. Everyone had a role, and everyone contributed information. Ultimately, Sully made the decision. They can't make it back, and they can't make it to Teterboro, the alternate airport. The Hudson River really became the only option. All 155 people survived that famous incident. We remember Sully, and rightfully so. His experience mattered, his calm mattered, leadership mattered. But Sully himself talked about the importance of the entire team, the crew, training, systems, the communication. That moment was not created in 3 minutes. It was created by years of building the right behaviors. That is the leadership lesson. You do not create trust during the crisis. The crisis reveals the trust you already created. Now, most of us aren't landing airplanes on rivers, but we all have these moments. A meeting where someone disagrees, maybe a project is failing, a team member who sees an issue, someone who has an idea but is not sure they should say it. Every day, people are asking themselves this question: is it worth speaking up? And the leader determines that answer.
Buzz, what can leaders do practically to create that type of environment before the crisis happens?
I think it starts with humility. Leaders have to remember that silence is not always agreement. Sometimes silence is just silence. And sometimes silence means I tried before and nobody listened. I don't think they really want my opinion. It is safer to wait. As leaders, we have to invite the truth before we need the truth. And a better question is maybe instead of does everyone agree, maybe what are we missing? What concerns do we have? What would someone who disagreed say? What if we're wrong? Maybe what if we're right? Those questions create openings. The leader also has to model it. I was wrong. I missed something. I could use your help. Those words do not weaken leadership, they strengthen it. Had a situation where we watched an exercise at US Stratcom, and the general, who was a two-star at the time, was leading the exercise as the person in the commander's seat. And to describe it, there had been an issue during the exercise, and the exercise went on for over 2 hours. At the end of the exercise, the leader, the general, spoke up first and said, "Hey, I could have done this better. I think I made a mistake here. I don't think I did this right, and I think this is how I could improve it." Had 3 or 4 young officers listening to that, and afterwards, one came up and told me, "Wow, I've never seen that before." And I said, "Well, what do you mean? We always have lessons learned and hot washes and debriefs after a situation, and we talk through them." He said, "Yeah, that's absolutely true, but I've never seen a general officer say he was wrong in front of a large group like that." It really made an impression on these young officers. So it demonstrated psychological safety, because people don't need to have perfect leaders. They just need honest ones. The fearless organization is not a place without mistakes. It's a place where mistakes become learning. If it is not a place without disagreements, if it is a place where disagreement becomes improvement. No mess, no magic. The magic is in the conversation we almost avoided, the ideas someone almost kept to themselves, the mistakes someone admitted early enough to fix, the concerns someone was brave enough to raise. And as leaders, our job is to create the environment where that happens, because the truth we never hear is the truth we cannot act on. I wanted to mention a tool that Amy Edmondson references in her book, and it's 7 questions for teams based around psychological safety. Number 1, if you make a mistake on this team, is it often held against you? 2, members of the team are able to bring up problems and tough issues. 3, people on this team sometimes reject others for being different. 4, is it safe to take a risk on this team? 5, it is difficult to ask other members of this team for help. 6, no one on this team would deliberately act in a way that undermines my efforts. 7, working with members of this team, my unique skills and talents are valued and utilized. And just to be clear, it's not about lowering standards. It enables candor and openness, and as such, as it's quoted in the book, thrives in an environment of mutual respect. It's where people can speak up and maintain those standards. This is really about your team being able to bring things up and necessary items when they need to and feel comfortable with doing it without being judged or pushed back against. How you as a leader exhibits that psychological safety is the most important. As I mentioned with the general officer, it made a huge impression on our teammates and those young officers. They talked about that later when I spoke to them again, at least a year or 2 after that had happened. And I referenced that story because the general officer genuinely wanted to make sure that people understood that it was his call, that it was his mistake, and that he felt the need to be able to tell people that we can improve. And he felt psychologically safe by bringing that up. And believe me, other people in that situation felt the same way, and it improved our team's performance overall.
Coach Buzz, can you give us this week's 3 coaching questions for our listeners?
For this week's 3 coaching questions, what might your team know, see, or believe that they do not feel safe enough to tell you? The no mess, no magic question. What important conversation are you avoiding because keeping the peace feels easier than seeking the truth? Finally, what is one thing you could do this week to prove that honesty is rewarded, not punished? Because culture is not what leaders announce, it's what people experience.
That was The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson. One of the most powerful lessons from this book is that psychological safety is not about lowering standards. It is about creating the conditions for people to perform at their highest level. When Captain Chesley "Sully" Sullenberger and his crew landed U.S. Airways Flight 1549 on the Hudson River, success was not created by one person acting alone. It was the result of preparation, trust, communication, and a team trained to work together under pressure. Crew resource management changed aviation by recognizing that expertise can exist anywhere on the team, but only if people are willing and able to speak up. That same lesson applies to every organization. The strongest leaders are not the ones with all the answers. They are the ones who create environments where the best information can surface.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Buzz. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe so you don't miss future conversations. And if you have a moment, leave a rating or review. That helps other leaders discover the show. If these kinds of leadership questions resonate with you and you'd like to explore them more deeply, feel free to reach out to me. Coaching conversations often start exactly this way. Until next time, work hard, tell the truth.